We will begin by calling the roll.
Commissioner Oliver, Commissioner Davidson,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Boyd,
Here.
Commissioner McMurray,
Here.
Commissioner Gooch,
Here.
Chairman Dodd.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver is stuck in traffic coming from Laverne, so I'm sure she will be here shortly. We have a relatively abbreviated agenda tonight. We had the choice in June, did we want to leave this meeting on the calendar? We chose to leave it and could cancel it if we needed to. Vice Chair Wilson and I felt like we could entertain Dr. Sullivan and give you guys and the community that chooses to watch an update on the survey, boundary survey, and enrollment survey that the school board is undergoing with the consultant. And so Dr. Sullivan was able to be present and present that. And because we have a slower agenda this month, we will not have a CCR report. The minutes are on the SharePoint if you care to review those. The special use fund, the school improvement fund, Director Smith is updating the book, so there's no new information there. I think since he's in the room, though, we'll have him come up and kind of share his thoughts on when we're going to hit the bond market next. I think that'll be a very brief comment from Mr. Smith, if you'll.
Did you say, Mr. Chair, that he's
back to the
updating the books or cooking the books?
Oh,
I missed that.
he does not cook.
Cook, okay.
No.
Closing the books would be more accurate.
Okay.
We order takeout up here. We don't cook up here. We don't have, as the chair mentioned, Fund 189, the school's special projects or capital fund. We are updating that. We hope to have the books closed at the end of this week or next week. And so you will have an updated report in August for that. And then an update, I wanted to give an update tonight on the bond market for the high school additions. As you know, the commission approved us to go borrow, I believe it was up to $154 million for the 3 high school additions. We did a bond anticipation note of $35 million that is currently issued. We plan on coming next month in August to budget. I believe that's August 10th, and then August 17th, I believe, is the full commission to come with the actual resolutions to go to the bond market. One of the reasons for that was there's a potential 1 or 2 county projects that will be tacked onto that. And just to give y'all a time frame of what that looks like, if it does pass the full commission on the 17th, which I anticipate the school's portion will because we don't really have a choice on that part, there will be a 20-day waiting period for that before we go to the bond market. Then we'll have about another week to 2 weeks as part of putting those bonds out to the bond market for bid and talks with the rating agencies. So you're looking at getting that money from the bond market middle to late September. But I just wanted y'all to see that when it comes to commission on the 17th, didn't want y'all to be blindsided. That is kind of our plan, but it will be in conjunction or compliance with what y'all passed originally for those 3 high schools. So I won't, rates are holding steady. I will say that. I don't want to give too much information because I do believe the Fed is meeting this week and potentially raising 25 basis points. But as of right now, I did get an update this morning, and bond rates for us, what we would be paying, are holding pretty steady to what we talked about during the budget process. But with that, I'll take any questions on that.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for sticking around a few moments. Commissioner Wilson reminded me that we need to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I have reviewed the minutes from our June meeting, and I find them to be in order. And without objection, I move for their approval.
Second.
And I hear a second. Commissioner Davis. All in favor of that, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Phil. And that leads us to the, and a new component, as I see our chairman here, a new component, guys, for all committee meetings are published and are available for public comments. Every committee meeting will have access for the public to come in and speak with a 3-minute time clock. And they can reach out to Rachel, they can reach out to me, I'm sure they could reach out to you guys. So Commissioner Phillips wanted to make this as open as possible, and I think he and Mayor Carr have made that an avenue to come to these meetings. We had no one reach out to either of us tonight, and I failed to mention that that opportunity exists for those in the public that wish to participate. And now back in order, item number 6, and that is School Board. Dr. Sullivan, if you care to join us.
Jimmy Sullivan, Rutherford County Director of Schools. So thank you, commissioners, anyone watching. So just to give you kind of a brief overview of how we got here, we did, and our board used RSP as their name, Associates. They're one of the largest zoning boundary analysis firms, and I'll go over a little bit of what they did. We started with them actually almost a full year ago. So the first thing they did was work through enrollment trends. They met with all different municipalities in Rutherford County, actually met with the city schools district, and we're going through trying to find where are zones, where's growth occurring, where are permits occurring, where do your students reside, all kinds of GIS work. So they presented an enrollment boundary or enrollment analysis, which is included in this first one. The second step then was to look at school capacity. And so we are still working through some school capacity numbers so that we are looking at how many students is it optimal to go to that school and how many students are actually residing in that school. So we've had a lot of good conversations around that and are working through that portion. They presented the first portion to our board on May 25th, and I'm going to kind of go over what we're working through so that you're aware. What our ultimate goal is to look through is to have a complete rezone of our school district, either for the 24-25 or 25-26 school year, depending on when different things come online. We want to make sure that we are good stewards of taxpayer money, so we feel like we need to use every available seat before we ask for additional seats. There's a couple things I want to just bring to mind. I know we've heard Mayor Carr and different commissioners talk about growth not paying for itself. That truly is the case when we're talking about student enrollment. So if we take our 51,000 students, TISA and our overall budget this year was $518 million, we are just over $10,000 a student. So that's how much a student is generating is $10,000. We're averaging 1,200 students growth every year. So those 1,200 students times $10,000, we're generating $12 million for a building that at the elementary level is going to cost $60. And so how are we into this shape? Why are we struggling for growth? Because again, it is strictly just not paying for itself. Let's take it at a high school level. You know, in 2 years, we grow the amount of students for a new comprehensive high school. So let's take 2,400 times that 10,000 per kid. We're at 24 million to where we know it's going to take much more than that to build a new high school. So why does the county commission feel the pinch? Why does the school board? Why does our taxpayers? It's strictly because it is truly not paying for it. So just want to give you just kind of a synopsis of why are we here, how are we here. That's strictly why we're here. So here's the first thing. Woo, I flew through that. So a couple things that I wanted to go over first. So when we are talking about, come on. This presentation, so you have this in your SharePoint. This is RSP, who we are working with. And so you will see they have worked with some of the biggest, and I'm on the third page, some of the biggest districts across the country. So they have worked with Omaha, they've worked with Oklahoma City. They recently have conducted Clarksville, Montgomery 2 years ago and really helped set them up to a path to be where we are hoping. And honestly, to tell you the truth, that is kind of what we're looking for, is to model some of what Clarksville, Montgomery has done between their zoning, boundary analysis, all of that. I actually think, let me make sure, I think we're on the other one. Make sure I'm on the right one. Yes. So I'm on the presentation that is the May 25th, 2023. So I don't know which one was loaded first, but we're on the one that's...
It's called Rutherford BOE Boundary Process on your SharePoint.
I could tell a couple people were looking around, so I wanted to make sure we had the right one. So Rutherford BOE Boundary Process. So that's the one we were looking at. So getting us to, I'm going to go to the fourth page while everybody kind of gets caught up with me. This is our plan of where we are. So you will see that we had our board looked at it on May 25th. We are having several, honestly, every week, a couple hours a week that we meet with the company and look at different concepts, look at different capacity analysis, so that the overall, we're going to have public input in September so that our board can hopefully vote in October, November, what new zoning boundaries are going to look like. So just to give you an overview of where we're headed. There's a couple things that we are constantly balancing. So when we are looking at these, of course, academics is our number one goal, but we also have to look at it from an economical standpoint, and then we also have to be aware of just different cultural aspects, whether it is parent involvement, socioeconomic status, the clubs and activities that are at the school. We have to keep all of these in mind. Unfortunately, some of these are in competition with each other. So let's just take enrollment and capacity. We have a ton of students that live in the Stewart's Creek area. If we took all of our students that lived in the Stewart's Creek area and we wanted to put them all in one building, we don't have the enrollment capacity, even though that may be what's best for the students. And so some of these are in argument with each other. The next one's one I want to spend a little bit of time on. So this is past, current, and future enrollment. So if you look across the bottom, I wouldn't get too worried about the numbers across the bottom because they take a couple things into account. So you are going to see where it has elementary, middle, high, and then district totals. And then you're going to see where it says reside/attend, how many reside, how many attend. And if you're looking at those, especially at the elementary level, it's going to throw everything off because of our sister school district. So we may have a lot more students who reside in our elementary zones because of Murfreesboro City. Because if you look at that, you see that we have a lot of students. Then comparing that to the how many reside versus attend, I wouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to those. What I would pay attention to is the charts across the top, and these I believe are in color on your SharePoint. You will see our enrollment trends. So 28-19, we're at 45,123. And then you see our projection. They are pretty much spot on with what our TISA projection is. So the State Department, based on our trends, has given us a 5-year kind of TISA projection enrollment, and they're within just a couple hundred students of each other. And so you will see by the 27-28 school year, we are looking at 56,605 students. Something I want to call out, this does not include pre-K. So we do serve 22 voluntary pre-K classrooms, and we serve several, we call them integrated, which is a requirement from the federal government of students with disabilities and what we call typical peers that we are serving at the same time. These are strictly students that we are serving kindergarten through 12th grade. So I know if we look at that, that's you'll see where our biggest numbers are. Our elementary school continues to jump, middle school continues to jump, and not surprising, high school continues to jump as well as we follow the trends. Moving forward, this is what the school board was working for, so we're looking at the sample boundary guiding principles. So the fourth one was one that we definitely wanted to highlight as a school board and as a district. Future boundaries can anticipate future growth of the neighborhood. And so we wanted to try to look at the permits that are out there or just the land that is being built, and that's where we used RSP to try to use some of those conversations with local governing bodies to try to figure out where's growth truly occurring. The next one tells you kind of what our expectation is, and I hope this goes without saying, but it has to be our forefront. That first bullet, exceptional education must take place at every school. Doesn't matter which school it is, we have to make sure it is taking place at every school. And then our board worked through about a 2-hour workshop with 10 different priorities, that all of these are different ways that you can go about rezoning a district. And we had to rank which ones we want to prioritize. And I'm going to go over these just very quickly so that you can kind of know when you hear us talk about rezoning, knowing that we are looking at all of these. The first one being contiguous school zones. And what we're looking at there is making sure that our attendance areas are in a nice, easy straight line, or as much as possible is the best way that I know how to kind of go over that one. And I'm going all over the place, so give me just a second. All right, so we were looking at contiguous and non-contiguous, and was that a priority for the board? It was not, just to let you know. And I'll show you where they ranked everything here in just a little while. We looked at demographic considerations next, so trying to make sure that things were as equitable as possible across the district, because we know we have a very diverse school district that we are serving. Then we looked at duration of boundaries. So this is an area in the past that I don't think we as a district have done a great job at, as I know that there was one area we were looking at even today that we talked about. That would probably be the 5th time that area has been rezoned in the last decade. So we need to make sure that we are keeping boundaries as consistent and for as long as possible with this rezone. They then looked at feeder systems, and I will tell you, this is how, as a director of schools, my vision has changed. So I very much believed in a strict feeder school system, so an elementary to a middle to a high. When we start looking at what the considerations do to enrollment and capacity, that one's not as realistic as I would like for it to be. We have schools that are, some of them, very close to each other. We have some that are very far from each other. And in order to use all of our seats in our district, it doesn't make financial sense or sense from just an efficiency standpoint to have hundreds of seats sitting in one area when we have portable sitting in another. So that's something that we looked at, but I'm not sure is very realistic. We, of course, looked at fiscal capital considerations. So how are we going to continue to add students and where are we going to place them? We then looked at it from a operational consideration. So if we add different things and add students and move teachers around, what is the operational aspect of that? A big portion that connects here is transportation. And I know transportation is a separate issue, but it is one that we have to consider. It's over $20-something million of our budget every year with transportation, so that is a big item. Then we got into looking at neighborhoods intact. So how do we want our neighborhoods? Do we want a neighborhood to be intact? Is that important to the board, or is splitting it in half something we can live with if we're utilizing our seats? And then we got to the one that has probably arguably become one of the most important, which is projected enrollment. These numbers aren't real on this sheet, so the real numbers are when we get into the next one. This is truly just a enrollment, just using it as sample numbers. So we kind of got stuck on this when we had our board meeting, if you go back and watch it, looking at arguing over some of these capacity numbers. Las Casas Elementary does not have the capacity of 1,000. It's about 680, 690, not 1,000. These are just strict numbers, so when you were looking at this, don't take this as the actual capacity for a school. But we are looking at projected enrollment.
Superintendent, we have a question from Commissioner Oliver.
Is there a reason why you didn't use real numbers so you can get a realistic outcome?
That is on the next presentation we will go over next. So this was just to show, as they were looking at, as you are going through as a board to highlight different ones, here's one thing that do you want to consider. So they were truly just throwing numbers out there to say, is this something you want to consider? But you'll see projected enrollments in our next presentation in about 10 minutes. So the last one, and this is one that is definitely one that we want to take into account, is the students impacted. And so when we are looking at students, I don't know that there's a right answer of, is it more beneficial for a student's academic and just emotional well-being to keep them in the school that they're at, even though that's in a portable, versus removing them from that environment and putting them in a new school? And I don't think there is a perfect answer there. So we were looking at how many students would be impacted. And again, these numbers are not accurate either. This is just we'll look at real numbers in a little while. And then one of the last ones that we looked at, I highlighted it because it is connected to fiscal operations, is looking at transportation considerations. I was talking to Chairman Dodd a little while ago. One of the areas that we looked at in some of our concept maps, because we are doing this work right now, was looking towards the John Coleman, Laverne Lake, Roy Waldron area, and knowing that John Coleman is not at capacity, but Roy Waldron and Laverne Lake are. And so they were trying to figure out, our zoning group, how can we shift some of those students to John Coleman? And the conversation really went around, there's not a bridge that goes over the river where we need it to go, or Percy Priest Lake, which was unfortunate, because we definitely could have used one there. We even had conversations around, and this is not something we're going to do, so please know that. Would it be okay if one of your buses transported students from the Laverne area into Davidson, into Wilson, then back down into Rutherford? And I was like, no, that's definitely not going to work. And unless you build a ferry system over in between the lake, I don't know how to make that any closer. So, no, those are things we are looking at as well and trying to fill all of our zones. So something that we do realize, and this came up quite a bit, is some of our criteria are going to contradict each other. And so we may want to keep our boundaries, this is an example they gave, as intact as long as possible, but to do that, we may have to move hundreds upon hundreds of students out of that. And so as a district, which one do we really, are we more worried about students impacted versus those? So here's where our board took all of those 10 that we just looked at briefly, and we had to prioritize which ones. So as a board, we chose a couple of them. We really looked at 3, and I think we added a 4th one. So number 1 for us was projected enrollment and building utilization. And so we truly wanted to look at, from our enrollment, how can we make the buildings stay as consistent as possible with enrollment. Then duration of boundaries was number 2, neighborhoods intact was number 3, and demographic considerations was number 4. And so that is kind of where we ranked as a school board looking at those different ones. So happy to answer any questions or comments on that first part. That is just an overview to walk you through what the board was doing before we actually started the rezoning conversation.
Question, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Relative to your K-5 students, we talked about reside versus, that whole thing, who's in the county. Are Murfreesboro City Schools zoned, or is that a choice? Do parents have a choice to come back to RUCO if they want to, or are they mandated to stay in Murfreesboro City Schools until 5th grade?
So from everything I understand the legal opinion, we are the county school system. And so we are required to take the students if they want to attend. We don't have to provide transportation. So I'll tell you, that happens a lot. We have one area in the city that is the John Pittard, Oakland, over towards Mitchell Nelson, that doesn't have a school, a dual zone with Rutherford County. And in that instance, parents take their student to Blackman or to Lascassas usually, but they have to provide the transportation because that's not an area that we are zoned for. I hope that answered your question. Technically, we would have to take them because we are in the state kind of pecking order of school systems. Every county has to have a county school system. Municipalities and special school districts can operate within that, but every county must have a county school system. So we are the must-have.
So then when you're budgeting, planning, things of that nature, you have to take into consideration those who reside versus those who actually come. Is that correct?
It's a mixture of both. Our middle schools are the ones we probably struggle with the most because we have a lot of those areas, that Mitchell-Nelson corridor like I was just talking about, we're not going to get a whole lot of students out of that area. Where we struggle is that 6th grade because they may have a whole dual zoned area for Rockville, Blackman, Oakland, Whitworth, and we offer both. Middle school has a zone across the entire county, so it's dual zoned across the entire county. And so those 6th graders are sometimes, honestly, it works this way. A kid goes to sports tryouts or goes and finds out who their teacher is. They don't like their teacher, they switch school systems. And so that is a very hard projection on how many students are truly going to be there. But yes, it does definitely come into account.
Did you have a concern, or I trust your instincts on schools and education, so what was your thought there? You're just processing how they put the info together, or do you feel like a student could be discounted or neglected? Or
It just sounds like the county's at the will of, or the mercy of the parents or the city. And you're having to plan for these students that may or may not come, which impacts a lot. So I'm just wanted to put that out there. And yes, I was processing that at the same time.
helps me process to know what you're
Without going too far down a rabbit hole, I was a 6th grade teacher at Blackman Middle School. And so we would not have our student schedules until after Labor Day. And now granted, this was almost 20 years ago because we didn't know which students were going to be there or which ones weren't. So
the last slide, page 27, The board selected those 1 through 4 as your top priority. Any questions on those? Do we need to look back at any of the slides that describe those 4 criteria? And on a quick rundown, I mean, to me, that's probably where I would have ended up. That seems pretty logical. Chairman Phillips.
4 topics, excuse me, not on those 4 topics, but you did mention the word that kind of caught my attention, and that's utilization. Could you expound
be
on
happy to.
that a little bit for me?
Yeah, so when you're looking at number 1, so that projected enrollment, building utilization, I also want to take into account that we discussed at length the financial obligation. When we are looking at projected enrollment, building utilization, we felt like that encompassed fiscal considerations, because if you're utilizing your buildings, then you're being fiscally responsible. Utilization, this is something we've just briefly started talking to our principals about, and kind of the language that we are using is that some things as a district we need to be tight on, some things as a district we need to be loose on. One of those things in the past we've been very loose on is how portables and how classrooms are utilized. So you may have one school that has their entire 4th or 5th grade in portables, to where you may have another school that has art, music, those different types, ESL, special education. We need to come as a district, as a school system, and really give some, this is the way buildings are going to be utilized. Core academic space is going to be number 1 of what in our overcrowded schools. That's what needs to be. Your kindergarten through 5th grade classes need to be your buildings. Second are going to be your elective areas, so those need to be your second utilization. We build classrooms specifically for those purposes. Third needs to be our support ones that we have, whether that needs to be English as a second language, because sometimes you can fit more than one of those classrooms. It's a smaller setting. We don't need 10 to 15 students taking up a classroom that is a normal classroom size. So that's what we are looking at doing as a district. I know that's going to make some of our leadership across the district uncomfortable, but those are conversations we have to make sure we are utilizing all the seats possible that we can.
Just a quick follow-up. Utilization, I understand what you're saying. Utilization, you're not looking at tracks year-round, any of those kind of things at this particular point in time?
We haven't, because honestly, I don't know that I could staff them. I mean, that's just the honest answer. We looked at multi-tracks for some of our schools as well. I worry about the maintenance cost, and I'm very concerned about the staffing. We are in better shape than most of our local school districts, but we still have several dozen teaching positions that are open as of right now as well.
Chairman Phillips, slide number 20, the fiscal considerations were both brick and mortar and staffing. It's an interesting slide. It's interesting for me to see the extent that y'all are going to try to look at this. Those are good criteria. Us lay people don't think about. So I just find those intriguing, Jeff, how they're.
It's the meetings that we are having, because we specifically, so our board has had several meetings, they'll continue to have more meetings, but the actual work to get to true concepts to our board is being done with our leadership team. Of course, the board can do as they see fit with that. I'm giving them updates as we see fit and as changes are made. Right now, we've been kind of in that summer lull, so we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to where there hasn't necessarily needed to be a big update yet. They've seen just about everything that you guys have. This second one that you're going to see in just a second, our board has not seen in a presentation style. I'm very, very cognizant that I always feel like the board is my boss. I need to make sure they see it first, so I sent them this in email. So they have seen it as of last week. They just haven't had it presented yet, because it is truly just a concept that we were working through 2 weeks ago.
With that having been said, the 4 items, and so all of that was just the criteria, how y'all put the plan together, the choices you had to make. This next section called boundary yield, boundary is an actual outcome, a
Yes.
module outcome? Okay.
So you will see something. You will see some of the same information here, but this is, you'll see it says boundary ELT meeting number 2. That's our executive leadership team with RSPs. So it's got RSP's group and our group, and we're truly looking at different concepts they present. We are on concept probably 4 right now, so that we're just truly working through like some of the individual conversations. I had to have for example, a conversation with a commissioner that represents the Rockville area about where is the line, like what separates Rockville and Eagleville. I knew nobody else to ask other than Commissioner Reed. Where is that line? Because I know that is one of the things that each community is different. And so that was just a kind of off-the-cuff conversation we had to have.
I'm sorry, Director, you mentioned there are 4, you're on concept number 4. Does it appear as if you've chosen to include concept number 2?
Yeah, and this concept I'm just sharing as one of the examples. And so this is one of our concepts that we looked for. We got it to 4, and now we are narrowing it back down to 2. And most of the concepts, it's very small changes. You may have a neighborhood here that's been rezoned 6 times, and now we're trying to only and leave that one alone. Some of the concepts we also looked at, we tried to look at a little bit of everything to take care of our needs. And please know these conversations are still ongoing, so there is no decision made. Our board will vote on that. And be very involved in this process as we start kind of the second, or start this coming school year. One of the things we looked at was to ask them about the Roy Waldron Annex. So could we make that a K-5 school by itself? Could we close the Roy Waldron Annex and use that as a behaviors and alternative school on the north end? What would happen if we did those different types of things? Because that school's getting to where it's going to need major renovation, and at what point is the major renovation versus the cost? When I know that we have an addition designed for Roy Waldron, that it's also one of the largest elementary schools in the state, and when you look at it from Roy Waldron and Roy Waldron Annex, which used to be Laverne Primary School, are very, on a map, they may look close together, but the logistics behind it is they're not that close together. So we've actually gotten a golf cart for the school so that they can go back and forth between the 2 campuses. So what would happen if we did that? We also looked at Buchanan. So we looked at Buchanan knowing that Plainview has a ton of extra seats. What could we do for Kittrell? And none of that really came to fruition. It was too big. Buchanan's too big for us to be able to look at. So those are just some examples of what we're kind of working through and walking through. We really try to leave every stone, try to turn them over so that we can see what's going on. If y'all don't mind, I will get on to the second one because this is the one that's probably going to have some questions behind it. So here's kind of where we are working through. So I just went over part 1, so establishing what they call as the sandbox. We have our process, what are our boundary criteria, and then those guiding principles, those 4 that we talked about. So now we are in part 2. So concept maps, concept analysis, we're comparing different concepts, and we again are doing a lot of this as a leadership team. What you don't want is while we're going through all these meetings to have just you may have one street that you change. And if somebody thinks one street, their street may be moved one way or another when we're truly just having conversation in an open board meeting, that can get out of hand when that is probably not necessarily something we're even looking at yet. So we're doing this as an executive leadership team, so you'll see that's part of part 2. September, October, November will be part 3. And there's some pros and cons to different things I will go over as this one of the concepts here in just a minute. So here are some notes you will see, and these are truly just the raw notes of what we've gone over. So you will see one of the things we looked at, and it was part of the addition conversation, was we need to increase projected students to Oakland High School. So that's one of the first bullet points. Looking at facility additions, Oakland, Riverdale, Smyrna, up to 2,500. A new high school, hopefully, in Mayor Carr, I met with him, Michael Smith, last week, so looking at either opening in 27, 28, or 28, 29, capacity plan for 2,500. You will see that the only land we currently have is on the Walter Hill site. You'll notice on part of the growth you're going to see is that we're in desperate need somewhere between the Laverne, Stewart's Creek, Smyrna area, and so that is a huge need. You'll see that they also talk about that Walter Hill site might not be the best because we already have a addition going on at Oakland High School. You'll see middle school building additions allow for portable current classrooms currently to be strategically placed, a new middle school location hopefully to be moved to the Beatty Farm site. And so that is a conversation that our board hasn't had yet. We haven't necessarily discussed that. We know that 2 schools would fit on that. I don't think putting a high school there makes a lot of sense. When we have Blackman and Stewart's Creek and then Siegel coming into that zone as well. The Blackman Middle and Rockville Middle area are two of the 3 largest middle schools in the state, and that area is kind of incorporated there. You'll see we talked about capacity planned for 1,200, and then we even looked at what do you do with Blackman Middle School? Do you build a 6th grade and make it Blackman Intermediate? From an instructional standpoint, I hate that idea. But from a how do we make the best of what we have as a school system, is that something we need to look at? Because we are past the 1,700 students, or will be past the 1,700 students, and that is way too many middle schoolers in one location. And then you'll see we adjusted some of our current capacities based on portables. So if you go to the next one, that just kind of goes over, whoa, I went flying. So this just goes back over again what our rankings were. And so our 4 rankings that they started developing concepts for us were projected enrollment, duration of boundaries, neighborhoods intact, and then demographic consideration. So that's what their concepts came from. So then we started working at concepts. I just picked one to show you. And so the first one that you were going to see are our current elementary boundaries. And I know this is ugly. Our zones are not very pretty right now. But you will see a lot of density, not surprising, closer to Metro Nashville towards the northwest of our district, and then larger zones as we get closer to the more rural areas of our district. So you'll see that's where those lines are. And then as we get to the projection table, this comes from RSP looking and having all those different conversations. This is something I wanted to highlight. And I know you can see this on your SharePoint better then you can probably see it up here. These are real numbers. Yes, these are real numbers. You will see the capacity. There's some different capacities we're still working through, like Kittrell Elementary, for example, shows 385 students. Kittrell Elementary used to be a K-8 building, and so that's one of those, as Chairman Phillips talked about, we need to look at how we're utilizing that building, because they used to be K-8, so I know their capacity. It's not going to be a whole lot higher, but anything we can do to gain an extra 100 seats somewhere, we need to look at. So that's an example of one we're looking at. Anything in orange is over 100% capacity, and so you will see there's some dire situations here. Some that are very concerning. If you look down to just, I like to kind of go over to 27, 28. That's not that far along when we look at buildings. Those would be our current first graders still being in elementary school by the time that they would finish out this projection. So some of our current first graders, if we do nothing, would be Browns Chapel, you're sitting at 1,065. A couple others to point out, Rock Springs Elementary, 1,309. Roy Waldron, 1,535. Stewart's Creek Elementary, 1,489. And so very large elementary schools with a lot of orange on this page.
Anything there, any questions there? Thanks.
All right, next let's go to middle. Middle school is a little bit more dire than elementary is going to be just because you have bigger middle schools, so the numbers are bigger. There's a couple zones here that just kind of stand out. One was the school I opened, Rocky Fork. That is a very strange zone. And so we know that we have capacity there. We've added an addition to Smyrna Middle School. So you will also, again, see towards the northwest part of the county, more dense. As we go to the more rural areas, you have more room. So then we get to the middle school projection table. So if we look at the middle school projection table. So you will see how big some of our middle schools are. Blackman Middle School, 1,690. They get to 1,920 by the time 2728 is here. That would probably place, right now, Blackman Middle School, with its enrollment, would probably place as a top 25 high school in the state. They would be definitely playing the highest level of football if they were a high school, just in their size. You'll see Christiana Middle grows somewhat. Laverne Middle continues to grow. Rock Springs Middle, Rockville Middle, even Rocky Fork Middle. We've got a little bit of room a couple places. We can rezone some of Siegel Middle over to Oakland, and those are things that we are looking at. But overall, you will see what our capacity is, 14,677, and then we are well past that really as we start. And so you'll see our capacities are much higher there. Any questions on middle school?
Dr. Sutherland, on the capacity percentage, at what percent are we beginning to have to look at portables? Like, for example, if it's 100.5%, I'm sure we're not looking at portables, but at what percent do you?
It's actually a little bit lower, about 95, because of our large ESL enrollment. So when you have a student that's English as a second language, I think we talked about that at our last one, we're almost 7,000 students, so almost 15% of our entire district is English as a second language. Those students have a, of course, core content area class, so they need your English, math, social studies, science, related arts, but then they also need a English as a second language class. And so you're looking about 95%.
95%, we begin to look at portables. So something at 110%, you're going to have portables.
We have portables at Blackman Middle. Of course, we have a lot of portables at Rockville High School. We had, of course, some board discussion with them about we want to do away with portables. Oh, my time's up. That was great. That was awesome. That was awesome. Jeez. I bet the board wishes they had that when I was talking, so that'd be great. But yeah, 3 minutes is up. We looked at the overall getting rid of portables, and right from the bat, RSP was like, it's not going to happen. He was like, that's just, I hate to be rude, it's just not going to happen. You don't have that ability, and so that's not a reality for us right now.
Say that again. What's not going to happen?
Getting rid of portables. If we continue to grow, we will not be getting rid of portables. There's not enough fiscal capacity in the county to get rid of anywhere to get rid of portables with as big as we are now. All right, so then we get to high school boundary, and again, I'm just showing you current. Every time I get, there we go. Here's our current high school boundaries. You're going to notice some pretty large boundaries. And then where some of our largest growth is still has a large boundary. So again, what we were talking about earlier is that some of our largest schools are in that Laverne, Smyrna, Stewart's Creek area, and we don't have anywhere for them to go. We really looked into one of these concept maps about the Stones River, kind of moving some of those students over towards Siegel, but again, there was no way to move them without having a ferry system that doesn't exist yet. We didn't have a way to move them there. And so that's where one of our big needs are. Then you start looking, and these numbers are terrifying. So just to tell you, when you look at our high school projection, again, in high school, we take all Murfreesboro City students. They end up becoming ours. We have the growth in some of our high areas, especially on some of the north end, north and west. You'll see by 27, 28, and that is the earliest. So if we're looking through a budget cycle, I could not imagine a new high school coming online before 27, 28. And so looking at these numbers is scary, and that's something that I have to try to figure out along with our board and in conversations with you all. If you see one of our smallest, of course, this is taking into account we're going to have to rezone. Laverne High School, 2994, Riverdale High School, 2663, Rockville, 2304, Stewart's Creek High School, 2965. The only way that those numbers stay without a new high school is if we add portables. We, of course, can rezone quite a bit, and we realized when we rezoned Rockville 2 years ago, because I know the question next is going to be, why do we have an addition at Oakland? So I'll go ahead and hit that one right off the bat. So when we are looking at rezoning, we rezoned Rockville 2 years ago, knowing that Oakland would have to have more students. So it has a lower enrollment because we knew that we would come back and rezone Oakland as part of relieving some of that overcrowding. But when you look at that, you see the need is definitely going to be the northwest part of the county.
Question, sir.
Yes.
So we had talked about there's two schools that did not, high schools that did not get annexed, and they were projected in the future. How does that affect these numbers? One being Laverne.
Yep.
Will it help with these numbers if there's an annex? Or are you thinking with an annex, this is what we're still getting?
Now, this would be without an annex. So our board, of course, hasn't voted on this. My recommendation as of right now would be to continue renovating Laverne High School to make it look like our other high schools so that the education is equitable across the district, and then build a new high school. I just feel like that's where we are in that area. We can build an addition, but it's not going to remove enough students from that area to get what we need.
Dr. Sullivan, we talked about Laverne a number of times, and it seems to, the city seems to be growing faster maybe than any other incorporated area from a percentage perspective. And we're talking about expanding the school systems and creating more desirable classroom setting for kids, that kind of thing. I know that last year, the Laverne area had a high growth rate, maybe higher than anywhere else in the county, once again, from a percentage perspective. So we've got new kids coming into the Laverne area, Smyrna area too, but mostly Laverne area is what I'm interested in. Are we determining why those kids are coming to Rutherford County and where they're coming from? Are we making any type of survey, putting information together as to why these kids are actually coming from Rutherford County? And the thought there is that keep continuing to improve our educational process. That improvement in the educational process feeds growth. That means that people are moving in here because of the educational process. So we're creating part of that problem ourselves by providing an outstanding education for children. So are we determining where these kids are coming from?
Yeah, so every student has to be tracked and accounted for in our education information system, EIS, which at the local level we use Skyward. Skyward's a different question and different conversation, but I can get a report to show you exactly where everyone's coming from because we have to track them for funding purposes. Like we can enroll them, but we won't get funding till the other district drops them. Yes, a lot are coming from Metro Nashville. You will see their enrollment is declining where our enrollment continues to grow, but that is for everybody that surrounds Metro Nashville. But then we still have a lot of people who are moving into any houses they can possibly purchase. I had a conversation today with someone about, you know, they're an educator and they can't afford to live in our county anymore, which is heartbreaking to hear.
It's kind of frightening to talk about that kind of thing, but I don't even know how to ask the question, let alone answer it. At some point in time, our school system is going to be so large that we'll experience some of the problems that, I don't mean to call them metropolitan.
My daily nightmare. It's what I worry about every day. I know exactly. Keep going, sorry.
Not because of lack of funding, but simply because of, I don't know, the makeup of a more urban versus a rural student. How are we even looking at that, or is there any way to offset that, or is there any way to prepare for that? And
So great point. So we are actually the 92nd largest district in the country. And so people do not realize that we are a top 100 district, but we are the 92nd largest based on the, end of 22 census data. And so I'm sure we're probably closer to 90, somewhere in the 80s right now. When you look at those districts, we actually discussed this with all of our new teachers yesterday, just as a point, this is the district you've joined. We don't necessarily want to be like those districts. And so to your point, how do we control that? One is we continue to try to keep culture as our number one thing. And so that from my perspective is the number one thing we have to focus on is a collaborative culture for our district. Then we have to make sure that we're efficient, that you don't get bloated as an administrative team, that you're efficient in your operations, that you try to fine tune things so that you have some level of accountability in how you operate as a district, but you also have some autonomy at the school level so that our schools can operate truly as schools and not get stuck in waiting to, let's say, like a purchase. You don't want somebody waiting to get a school to wait 30 days to get a yes or a no on a PO to purchase new computers for a classroom. Those are some of the things that frustrate. We had a new AP that just joined us from Metro, and we were literally having the conversation that we were frustrated. It took us 3 days to get something accomplished. Like, how can we speed that up? And honestly, within 10 or 15 seconds, this gentleman came over and introduced himself. And he said, I just want to thank you guys, the efficiency that you guys have as a district. I have access to my cameras and I'm on day 2. And I was like, well, that was the right timing, but we forget. But you're exactly right. Once you get to a certain size, your ability to be as successful as you like is going to struggle just because of your size. When I look to what do I want to do during my tenure, is to make sure we're moving forward and keep us from becoming that, because I unfortunately feel like we are very close. Very close. The other part, and I'm going to try not to get into
Quick
politics.
question.
Yes.
When you say becoming that, what does that mean? Because the numbers are showing that we're growing and we're going to be large like Metro. So what does that mean?
Having the biggest concern for me is having classrooms covered. And so when I look at some of the large districts across the country, Metro being one of them, they have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of classrooms uncovered. How we educate in a system to where it is normal to have classrooms uncovered, we've had that a little bit the last couple years. Our salary study has addressed that, but again, we still have several dozen. Ours isn't attrition as much as it's growth. We can't add the number of teachers to our district that are graduating or that are available candidates. So how do we as a district keep ourselves from becoming the norm of, well, this teacher, we just don't have this teacher filled. We'll rotate your kids through and I'm sure they're going to get an education. They won't. So how do we not become that, is what I'm mostly referring to. The other part of it, and you didn't know this, but you fed right into it, I do envision one of the biggest things that will be upcoming in this calendar year, and again, I'm going to stay very bipartisan as I can with this. I do envision vouchers getting mentioned a lot this coming this school year, and I believe that will be, this is how you solve Rutherford County's growth, give a student a scholarship or a voucher to go to a different school. The reality is even our private schools are overcrowded. They don't have the room for students either. And at that point, you are also, how do we not become Metro, is you don't want some of your highest achieving students fleeing your school system. And that is what I fear would happen in that. So we have to make sure that we have programs and academics to the level that it doesn't matter what type of achieving student that you are, we're an attractive destination. Did I skirt that well enough?
Yeah, you did great. And I don't even know how to say it, let alone ask those type of questions, but the vision that I've always had is urban versus rural, deals with family commitments and family involvement, not parental involvement, not just trying to teach the kids, but to treat the whole family as a whole. And I know we've been able to do that for the most part, and that's my concern is as we become more urban and less rural, that family involvement is something that in my mind is not there at some of the more urban.
And what we find is, I used to be the school that I don't find it's a lack of wanting to be involved. A lot of times it's a lack of a language barrier, or a language barrier. So when we can't have those conversations because we don't have a common language, and that's something as a district that we have to try to, and probably as a society, figure out. So sorry, I didn't mean to get on so.
Commissioner Gooch, you had a question a moment ago. Commissioner Phillips may have covered it.
Well, I guess my question was, this is a very minor question. I'm looking at, say, a magnet school central, and you would think that people are just waiting and waiting and waiting to get in there, and they're just at 85% capacity. How would we get more people?
So we have that capped on purpose. We leave that capped because we want to make sure, yes, it may show that capacity because that's you looking at every classroom having 30 students in every one. When you get to even some of your specialized high school courses, we are calculating it on 30, but a career and technical education classroom can only have 20 students in it so that you can accept federal funding for it. So great question, though. Again, I didn't want to get down the voucher road. I sense that coming as a way to alleviate our growth, and I don't feel like that is a help to us whatsoever as a county. Yep. So next is just one concept. So this is just one of the concepts. Again, we've looked at 4. This just is them looking at different concepts, what would happen. So there's a couple things I want to point out. here. First, you will see that halfway down the page, this has a new elementary school coming online in 25-26. So that would be the Beatty property that would come online the 25-26 school year. So this is something the board and I are going to have to really discuss and decide. We would love for all zoning to go into place next year so that we can relieve some overcrowding from some of our schools. But do we want to move students and then the next year a school open and move students all over again? And so those are conversations we've not yet had, but that we need to have in looking at the reality that a new school is not going to open until 25-26. You will see just in this concept, for example, this concept, it comes online the 25-26 school year, and you will see where some of our highest percentages are some of our schools that are not growing as quick. So you will see Buchanan Elementary, Kittrell Elementary, Las Casas Elementary. McFadden is capped enrollment, so even though you're going to see 101%, that may be one extra student they have. The state allows 25 kids, but by averages, we can have 26 in one classroom. So that's not truly they're overcrowded. And then Stewart's Creek Elementary, and this one is still a concern, even with that new elementary. So we asked them to go back and look at some of those zone changes we needed to make. But you'll see that takes a lot of our schools, just to give you an idea of what one projection we looked at. Any questions on that? And this is truly just there's a map that goes with it, but I didn't share it on purpose because once a map goes out there, people start losing their minds in a nice way. And so we want to make sure that we don't cause undue stress when there's no reason to.
This is, maybe, I should have asked this in the previous module. The projected student enrollment, is your consultant taking, as Commissioner Wilson mentioned, there's 10,000 new lots approved in
Yes.
Smyrna over, do they take actual planning commission numbers or just pure project?
Now, they're taking anything that they would have met with the city of Laverne probably in November, December, and Smyrna the same. So anything that's changed between that time period probably wouldn't be updated, but anything that was on the horizon. And I'll meet with them again next week. I'll ask them to follow back up and see if there have been any major changes that they need to update their numbers on.
Is this appropriate time? Are you going to get to, so these added student bodies, I'll wait till you get to high school. Carry on. Thank you.
So the next thing is what we've really focused on as well, is that this SIBC table, how many students are impacted. And that's something that we just want to see, because I really started looking at it from yes, these students are with us right now. We want to make sure they get the best education possible and wherever they are. So getting back to is it better to be in a portable than to be moved 2 or 3 times? And so that's where you're looking at the number of students. This plan only shows 14% of students being impacted. To get to some of our goals, we're probably going to have to impact closer to 20 or 25, but this is looking at just a very less aggressive. All right, so now we get to middle school. So middle school, you will see, and this follows along with kind of what I had talked to just some of our local elected officials about, Mayor Carm and then Michael Smith, about a new middle school. So you will see middle school enrollment, huge concerns like we talked about. This adds a middle school in the 26-27 school year, so 1 year after the elementary school opens, which we've talked about a little bit during the budget process. Elementary, then middle high are kind of right behind it. You could argue either one. You'll see by the time a middle school comes online, Blackman Middle will be at 1808, Rockville Middle 1562, and we just built an addition there, and you'll see their addition puts them at 1470. It opened last February, and they'll be full. So it's not just the northwest and north part of the county. There are other concerns as well. But you'll see that new middle school kind of comes online, that 26-27, and then the new boundaries get us in a much better place outside of Laverne Middle School, and Rock Springs Middle, still that same area being a concern. There are some things we've asked them to look at just so that you can kind of get an idea. When we look at this concept mapped, I see Siegel Middle only being at 91%. And so we've asked them to go back and look at all these. How can you make the numbers a little bit more rounded to alleviate some of that overcrowding? This is where I had mentioned a little while ago that I was so keen on moving into the director of schools job that I wanted feeder systems across the board, and then it got to, well, some of our schools with a feeder system sit at 140%, and that's not good for anybody. So now getting to Chairman Dodd's one he talked about just a minute ago, so our high school projection table. And so this does not have a new school built into projections because this only goes to the 27-28 school year. And what we just talked about, we probably couldn't have one till the 28-29 school year. So this is looking like our reality as of right now. Blackman High, 2408, Laverne High, 2994, Riverdale, 2663. Again, we know that this doesn't incorporate all the zone shifts to Oakland to relieve some of Riverdale, Rockvale, and probably a little bit of Smyrna. But there's some real concerns with this, and I don't know a way to say that other than there's just some real concerns when we're looking at the number of students we have versus what our capacity is. You will see, as of right now, we're at 17,960 students. Even when we get the additions, let's say the additions were done tomorrow, we're within 900 students. Well, by the time the additions line up, we're already overcrowded again, which I think we all probably pretty much realized of where we are. So happy to answer questions about high school. They're all dire. That one's probably the most concerning.
So just the elementary projection table, well, this is just a model, page 10, I believe. Current capacity is 2156. 2728, you'll have a little bit of room. You will be at 20,000 with the new school on board, right? Am I reading it right?
Yes.
Middle school, you will be over capacity by 500 students or so. Correct?
Correct. The unknown there, of course, though, is Murfreesboro City. And so this is the best guess estimate we have for Murfreesboro City.
Then 1,500 or so in high school over. We touched on before the meeting, I just happened to catch you walking up here. You're graduating 3,500 a year. If I use your real round numbers.
Yep.
And that's obviously reflected here. 2,000 coming on, 1,200 a year coming on board, 3,500 a year departing, average.
Plus that cohort of kids that's rising.
So what?
Plus the cohort of kids that's rising. So it's not just a 3,500 rolling off, 1,200 coming up. You also have that cohort of 3,500 kids who is going.
Eighth graders that are rising to the high school. I noticed Trey and Jeff will recall that some of these projections, the 5-year plan had elementary school as critical, crucial. 3 years later, the subdivisions were built and the family dynamics changed, and it became all of a sudden it's the high school that's over capacity. So I guess we do have to always just be, these are just projections, but we have to make decisions. We can't be too flexible.
The point I'd also like to add is so that while we're grateful for additions and everything that we've done prior to this high school year, we are also, the last school we opened was Plainview in 2020, and so we are now 3 years without opening a school. Man, I got buzzed again. I'm sorry. No, it's not a favorite point to bring up. But by the time we open a brand new school, it will have been 5 years, and we at our average will have grown 5,500 to 6,500 between that. What I am hoping, we of course our teachers start school next Tuesday, and then students 4 days after that. What I'm hoping is that we don't have an explosion in student enrollment like we had 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we ended up with just over 2,200 kids. Last year, we backed down to 1,000. I was like, all right, we only added 1,000. If we get back to that 2,200 or even anywhere close, this just becomes more because this is based off of kind of what is in the pipeline and that 2 to 3% growth projection.
Question.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Looking at your high school projection table, you're looking at current versus new, current boundaries versus new boundaries. The new boundaries, is that what you're talking about when you talk about the zone shifts?
Yes, correct.
So it looks like with that, Oakland will never be at capacity.
That's why this was just concept one, and so when we met with them, that's why it was, if we went back to, I think, to the second page that we talked about, nope, maybe it was the third page, so the number one bullet point for them was increase projected students at Oakland High School.
Okay.
And this was, so these all came in the same round of meetings. We have had 2 additional meetings since then.
And Riverdale will be at capacity and over capacity continuously, looks like.
That's an easy.
So they'll still be having portables there with these projections, correct?
I'll tell you what we looked at today, just not taking demographic consideration, any of that, was shifting Oakland closer to Riverdale, kind of what the traditional Oakland-Riverdale boundary was, and that had a substantial drop in Riverdale's enrollment and a substantial increase in Oakland's enrollment.
So to Commissioner Oliver's point, this is highlighting to you some potential errors that compel you to go to another model, if you so choose.
Oh, yeah, this was truly not a model. Like, every model, when we discuss it, it's outdated the second they bring it up for discussion because, like I mentioned, the one they brought back today didn't take into account the area between Percy Priest Lake and Stones River. So that was a model. It was great when they showed me the numbers, and then it was show me the map, and it doesn't work. And they have also visited and toured every one of our schools. They've gone over capacity, went to every classroom, so they've been here on the ground in all of our schools as well.
And you say Holloway, Daniel McKee, and Central Magnet are capped.
Yes, and Holloway is not at 325, so they sit at about 150. So that's a school we're constantly trying to add students to. However, when you have a small high school like Holloway, we also have the accountability portion of it. With it being a small school, if you add 3 students and those students aren't on track to graduate, that school very much could fall in the bottom 5% for graduation rate. So that's something that you hate to talk about, but something we have to look at and see. Again. And then I'll just show you, so this is just quickly to show you how I included concept 1 and 2, so we could just show an example of how some of these numbers change. This was not good. I just showed, no, that was wrong. I'm sorry, that was the end. I went back to the beginning. Concept 2 on there, okay. Yep, so it keeps going crazy on me. Let's look at concept 2. So this is just a high school projection table. Again, same exact thing, just took different things into consideration. And again, these are just an example. It's not something that's been or will be presented to our board because this is just a concept, again, that's outdated by this point. But here is one to where they had increased enrollment to Oakland High School to 2,078, so we are moving in the right direction, but still not where we would like for it to be. And you will see Riverdale still high, but Laverne still the exact same number because there was nothing in that area that we could do to Laverne to relieve some of that overcrowding. Stewart's Creek High School dropped a little bit because we were able to rezone a couple of students over to Smyrna High School, which then went to Siegel, which then went to Oakland, as we were looking at some of those things. I'm going backwards, looking at the middle school level, so I'm just going to flip back just to kind of show you a little bit of a difference in numbers. So we did not like this boundary analysis because it didn't get enough of our schools under capacity of what we were looking at. We're trying to get, ideal, you want 75 to 90%. When we were talking to the consultant the very first time, he said, that's not going to be your reality. You're not going to be 75 to 90%. Your reality is we're trying to get you 95 to 105%. He was like, you are taking full house or Fuller House and moving it to full house. He's like, that's what you're doing with your zoning, is Fuller House to full house. And so that was just an example of middle school, still some issues in some of the schools that we've talked about. In elementary school, I just included that students impacted again, just so you could see a difference if you wanted to, of what this concept would do. This concept really overloaded Brown's Chapel, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Just to kind of go over a couple of what the concepts were, just to compare, because I like that every time we meet with them, they do this. You will see just some challenges that we have at each school based on these different concepts. So we were able to, I know some of this was doom and gloom, but I also want to point out the positives. Like just by looking at district rezoning, we were able to resolve quite a few of our enrollment challenges that we have. You'll see concept 2 actually covered a little bit more, but added Stewart's Creek Middle School to a challenge. And so there are pros and cons to each way, but we're trying to resolve as many of our issues as we can with growth and fill up the seats that we have. So in looking at our next steps, we actually met with them for 2 hours today. So they took some of this feedback, we met with them. They had 3 new concepts today. And so we kind of tore those concepts apart as well. And so now they'll bring more concepts back to us next week so that they hopefully can present a couple ideas for our board and then also for just public consumption so that the public can see this is what it's looking like. We start a large media marketing campaign in September around that as well. We'll have a media day to where we invite every local media official and member and group out there to hear just our talking points, why we're doing this, why we need to do this, all those different types of things. And then we will have different public input meetings. We have a Board of Education meeting on November 7th and 9th to where we would hopefully vote on new boundaries with, again, the reality looking like some of the conversations we have to have. We wanted to put these in place next year, but does that make a lot of sense if we then have to rezone again the following year when a new school comes open? So tackled budget the first year and zoning the second year. I don't know what the third year is going to entail for me, but it's got to be exciting, right?
I think that's your last slide, number 30.
Yep, I know I got a little winded, but we had a lot of questions, so good work.
Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. I was trying to hold some questions and comments to the very end to hear your exciting conclusion. So I hope I don't forget these. These are no particular order, but it seems like the data we've been presented with, and also several commissioners here, anyone that lives between the north end of the county and Laverne, and I'm going to especially highlight the west side of Interstate 24. It seems like the bulk of our problems are going to be between Laverne and through the Blackman area towards Rockville on the west side of 24. And I mean, it seems overwhelmingly different than what's happening east of the interstate. So I feel like the data, I already knew that from driving just from my home every day. It's constant construction, and I have been a sounding board to you every time I see you, reminding you of how many permits are pulled in Laverne and Smyrna, what's coming, and if we're not looking at it, we're going to have a tsunami that we're already behind. And I think it's time for us to be honest about that. We're far behind. We're playing catch up. I want to start with this question. It seems that a high school in the north end is absolutely imperative. Now, I realize we've already taken care of a plan on an elementary school on the Beatty property. That's going to bring terrific relief to the elementary problem. This data clearly shows a high school that's going to do something to take care of Laverne, Smyrna, Stewart's Creek, and Black. So that's imperative. Where are we anywhere in the process? Because as far as I know, we do not have any land purchased to put a high school anywhere in the north end. And I'm just curious if you can update everybody, where are we in that process? Because this proves to me that that's a 3-alarm fire that if we don't discuss as fast as possible, I mean, will it get sold to someone and will it start developing to be something else? That's my first question.
That is correct. We do not have any land in the north end where we would build, where it would be optimal to build a high school. The furthest north that we have is at the Matthews property, not anywhere in the Smyrna-Laverne area.
Walter Hill, right?
Nor do we have any funds in the land line to be able to purchase any land.
Okay. And I don't know when those discussions come next. Where do you feel like that ranks in importance of discussions on what we're doing next or where we're looking for funds? I mean, do you feel, am I correct in my assessment that if it's not there, I say this often to my constituents, I don't want you to be able to live just on the other side, the south side of Stewart's Creek High School, that you could throw a rock and hit the building, but you end up driving 15 miles to your school. And I feel like I'm exactly right every time I tell that story, that what's going to happen where we're at, and it's because we don't have the funds. If we have the money, there isn't a problem money won't solve. We would start building the new high school and buy the land today. So I want to make sure people understand that we've been discussing a property tax increase. Look at what we're facing, doing the bare minimum with what we have, and look where we have to go. And I'm asking and putting it out there to the public for discussion, look at what we need, what we're going to need to get it, and we're going to have to work together, because these problems will take years to solve. How many homes and kids are going to be built in my district and come to my district before the high school's built? We're already over capacity at Stewart's Creek High School. What's going to happen next? And so I just wanted to point that out. The next thing, I want to talk about something that Chairman Phillips mentioned. He was asking about, do we have numbers, data? Where are the kids coming from? Where are the families coming from? They're absolutely coming, number one, from Davidson County. And I'm going to say this because this is important information. We are the least expensive place to live in Middle Tennessee. We have the lowest property tax rate, even with an increase, of all of the surrounding Middle Tennessee counties, with incredible quality of education. I have never seen people stretch a dollar like rubber like we are. We're doing the best job we can. But when you are the least expensive place to live in the county, you're going to be very attractive to people coming. Natalie and I are realtors. We're constantly speaking with people from other states, and I'm talking constantly. It's from Seattle, they're from California, they're from Texas. This is not rumors, this is real. You know why they're picking Rutherford County? Because we're a great deal. And I saw some numbers from the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce today that showed how many people reside in Rutherford County but work in other counties. There's a big number of people. Why? Because you live here, but you can go work somewhere else because we're the least expensive place to live. The growth is not only going to not stop, it's going to compound, and it's going to grow and be bigger than we're projecting, because as inflation goes up, we are a place of refuge for quality of life, quality of education, because we've been doing it right. Well, we're at the point we're going to have to come together as a local government, our constituents and everybody, and start having hard conversations that we cannot keep doing the same things and arrive where we want to stay. Those days are gone. And I'm getting all that from data. So I just want to point out that we see it every day, Chairman Phillips, where that growth's coming from. They're leaving places that they're taxed high and the rent is high, and they're coming where it's more affordable. And then we are having to educate those kids. And I want to educate. They're here. Those kids did not get here on any decision of their own. Our job is to educate them and give them the best chance to be productive and do something in society. So we have a big task. We had this conversation a lot. It's going to keep growing, we think, more than the projections show, because we're affordable. So what we've done is a great job, Chairman, of having the most affordable, great place to live with excellent quality of life, and now everyone wants to be here, and now we're dealing with the other problems. So it's like job well done, and now we have to figure out what to do with all the folks coming.
And I'll hit on
Wilson, go ahead. Commissioner Phillips.
I'm sorry, just one quick follow-up. We've
You got
got
something, Laura?
8 high schools, if I'm not mistaken. 6 of them are at 2,500 capacity, with the addition to the 3 schools, Oakland, Riverdale, and Smyrna. That leaves Laverne and Blackman. Initially, we were talking about increasing the size of those. Is that still on the table? And what's the timetable for the school board to present that to the commission for expanding those 2 schools?
So that, of course, will be a school board's decision, but my recommendation is going to be to renovate Laverne High School. Blackman's had some renovations, and then build a new high school instead.
So we may not increase the core size of Blackman, but we're planning on doing Laverne next year, year after next?
I wouldn't recommend increasing the core size for the cost, because I think we're better off building a new high school in the north corner if we have land.
Versus expanding Laverne?
Versus expanding Laverne.
So we may not expand those two, we'll build. May be able to build cheaper than we could expanding those two. That answers that question. The other two high schools, out of those 8, we've got Eagleville, and it's a fairly small high school, a couple hundred students, is that correct? 300 maybe? And then Central Magnet, and I think they're at 600 or 700 or 800, somewhere in that neighborhood. Any way to expand, like on I'm not talking about Central Magnet, maybe Eagleville.
Yes,
Any way
so
to expand that?
I'm glad you brought that. That's a conversation we've already had once with the board in the past. It has been very much not to rezone Eagleville from an athletic standpoint, because that changes their classification from athletics. We, of course, respect that, but that is not a decision we can make when we are asking for funding to worry about the classification for athletics. At least that's not my recommendation. The board could choose differently, but based on the conversations I've had, we all realize that Eagleville could take a couple, probably 100 more students. And that was why I had the conversation with Commissioner Reed. Hey, when I'm looking through these, where is the line? Like, I know you know where Eagleville and Rockville separate. I can't tell it on a map. I may live in Christiana, but I don't know where the line is. So please help me know where the line is so I don't inadvertently move one group to the other. So you're spot on with that.
Comment,
Yes, ma'am.
well, question. Comment first. So now you're saying that there's no, I guess, expectation of doing any type of annexation at Laverne High School. And then you're saying there's no land, no money to build. So how are you planning on resolving the issue of the overcrowdedness, especially considering all the money that was just approved to be spent, and then 2 of those schools are still going to be overcrowded?
Right.
And that's a challenge. That's a challenge that I'm hearing from my constituents. And so, help.
Yep, I agree completely. So that's something we talk about when we are looking at a Title I high school. One, we want to make sure that our high schools are at a size that is optimal for them to be successful. And so when we're looking at Laverne High School, we want to make sure that we already have some challenges with safety and transportation with a road that goes right through the middle of it. We have some concerns adding on to an additional section with that. The other part of looking at that is, in talking with our school administration there, is that we truly first want a institution at Laverne that looks like the rest of our high schools. Even it is from our walls being painted, which we are working on, the outside, but then working on painting the inside of the classrooms, replacing the chairs, replacing the bookshelves. And I know that may seem minor, but that sets the entire culture for the school of what is important. And it's an older school. We need to be able to address some of those things. I'm not saying we're totally against the idea of adding an addition on to Laverne High School, but I want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is going to continue to increase the academics at the school as well, and not just add seats just to add seats. If we can make Laverne High School, even if we've thrown out, do you have a section of Laverne High School that is almost like a magnet school within a school, to make Laverne High School, and we don't want to add kids, of course, with this, but what makes, outside of the early college, what makes Laverne High School stand out? And that may be something we have to look at. So we've kind of talked a little bit about all of those, but I wouldn't say we're completely throwing out the idea of an additional annex at Laverne High School. We just need to see, does that make sense there compared to other things and the renovation we need?
And so you say the challenge is the driving through the campus, but wasn't that the challenge with Oakland and Riverdale as well, being able to drive through the campus, and yet things were done there? Right. So I guess I'm still not clear.
Yep. I think the difference there would be you have been able to drive through the campus versus one goes right through to the neighborhood, to the Stones River. I can't remember what that road is that is right behind it, but it's used as a thoroughfare to where the roads at Oakland were truly just not wanting kids to be able to drive safe. Laverne has that to where you have the athletic fields on the left side and the school on the right side. Where would the actual addition go, and can we close off some of that road as well? We've also talked about, do we build Laverne Middle School still has a little bit of land, and I really don't like this idea at all from an academic standpoint. Laverne Middle has a little bit of land. Do we want to build like a 9th grade academy at Laverne Middle School to help relieve overcrowding? I don't think that helps our high school students integrate to the high school campus at all. but it's similar to what we were looking at when I talked about Blackman Middle having a 6th grade intermediate. How can we provide the best experience for our students?
And from a timing standpoint, you mentioned earlier, you guys hope to, your next steps, tell me again when you hope to anticipate having a concept closer to reality.
But we will have a couple just different concepts from my understanding today in meeting with RSP, was having a couple concepts that the public could have ideas about and give us feedback. Of course, you usually know that feedback is going to be, I love these ideas, but please don't rezone my student. That's usually how, and I totally get that as a kid who was rezoned, I get it. But that's usually what the conversations, but there are going to be some that we just may not think about because we don't live in that area. So giving us feedback there, RSP will take that and then take some other feedback that the board gives them in September as well to present in October, November, with hopefully a vote in November. Again, the big thing for me is going to be, is that going to go into place in August of '24 or August of '25? I think that's the big conversation that we have to have. Now, there was also some conversation about some of the charter school groups relieving some of our overcrowding. One of the two that we have authorized so far has, they made this public back in January. Jared with Empower Academy is great to work with, but they've pushed their opening back. They're also looking at contingency plans, so they'll open in August of '24. They're going to open only as a K-5 campus, and so looking at that, hopeful be able to relieve overcrowding doesn't necessarily look like a reality in that standpoint as well, because they're running into some of the same issues we are, from financing to building to construction. We're all competing for the same thing.
Commissioner Wilson.
I just wanted to make mention, since you mentioned Spring Charter, they're going to be finalizing through the Smyrna Planning Commission to get the final approval on their building at the next meeting. And I just want to say to the chairman, at some point when we can schedule it, in talking with them, I said, when you are through the Planning Commission meeting and you have approval where your money is procured on how they're taking care of the revenue bond, the building has been approved, I said, at that point, I would like for you to come to Health and Education so we can start a conversation, because at that point you're going to start building this school. So just for us to get comfortable with how that works inside our county school program. And one thing that's neat is there's several former Rutherford County school teachers retired that are now part of that board. And so I think it's really great when the community says, if we're concerned about what's happening and it's new and we're skeptical and have questions, what's a better way to help make it successful? Then let's get on a board, or let's be in discussions and make sure we're staying in constant communication, because we all know if a charter school were to fail, we would be taking the students back. I know it's our number one concern. So number one, if they are taking students, and that's something that's happening with or without our permission, it's happening, then we need to try to make it successful, because if it's not successful, those kids come back to us, and we're not making plans for that. So we need to talk about, one, the public needs to understand if they are able to take, 500 to 800 kids, which is Spring's projection. If an elementary school is $60 or $70 million for 1,000 kids, we're talking about the fact that they're taking their own revenue bond to build that building. Taxpayers in Rutherford County are not paying $60 to $70 million for their building. They are taking that on, and they are paying for that building out of the proceeds of what they're receiving. So I just think there's some conversation to understand the economical impact of what charters do as part of trying to get students into seats. And so we're coming together. Once again, they're coming if any of us like it or not. So I want to make it successful and partner with them to make it work. So we'll talk about having them come to talk to Health and Education. And even if Chairman Phillips thought it would be something that the full commission would like to hear because it's so new, I'm sure they would be happy to do so. But as soon as they're through the rest of their approval process, we'll see if we can do that, sir.
So my deal with Umbria, so Springs actually is a Rutherford County school, so we are the authorizer, so they will, yes, they have their own board, but they are one of our schools too, so.
Thank you for that presentation. But it was a healthy Give and
Healthy
take, I
debate,
believe.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Claire Maxwell, school board member, joined us. I see. Thank you for giving your time. Francis Rosales, thank you for taking your time out. These two guys are part of what's putting the heavy lifting into this report, so thank you for being here. Next month, our next meeting in August, I'm not sure the date at the moment, I believe it's the 24th. I'll be out of town, and Chairman Wilson has agreed to lead the meeting, so I think he'll be in charge of that. If there's no new business or announcements, Chairman Phillips?
I've got the 29th.
29th. Thank you. Thank you. I'm a week out. So next meeting here, November the 29th at 6 p.m. August 29th. My next trip is November, so. Without any other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Adjourned.